I'm joined by British journalist Vanessa Beeley. She's with me here to talk about this news BBC scandal and the white helmets. Hi Vanessa, it's great to have you on. How are you doing?
Hi Richard, it's really good to come on. I've been following you for a while, so it's really cool to be on with you.
Of course. It's a pleasure to have you. So we have a lot to unpack with this this email. But just before we get into it, just so people have some background information, how long have you been in Syria and how long have you been covering the white helmets?
Well, basically, I came to Syria for the first time in 2016. And then since then, I've been coming every couple of months for sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time. Actually, it was Cory Morningstar who has to be given credit for first alerting everyone to the existence of the whole NGO complex that was driving the conflict in Syria and that had created the White Helmets as a sort of intelligence organization embedded exclusively with the terrorist and extremist armed groups inside Syria. And so basically from 2016 onwards, I spent my time inside Syria following the White Helmets, entering areas either as it was being liberated or after liberation, and then pursued the investigation into the White Helmets, taking civilian witness testimony. And as you said, I've spoken at the UN in Geneva. I've spoken at New York via webinar, because of course the countries that you can't visit and then go to America, I've probably visited all of them except Yemen.
Yeah.
and that's definitely on my bucket list.
This email that you received from the BBC from Chloe Hadjimateo, had you ever spoken to her before, or was this the first contact that you've ever had with her?
No, she contacted me for the first time in June, and she approached me on my sort of official Facebook page. It's really kind of posh, but it isn't at all. But anyway, she came on my messages on there,
right?
With a load of very inaccurate research, and then our conversation went sporadically from there. She was trying to get me to participate in the upcoming audio documentary on James Mazurier and the NGO that he set up, Mayday Rescue, that was siphoning money from the British government to the White Helmets inside Syria. And then gradually I started to feel very uncomfortable. I felt that this was just heading towards being another attack, another smear. They were only going to give me 5 minutes to speak, and then of course it would be edited. It's not a live debate or anything like that. It would be pre-recorded, so they have every opportunity to edit and insert whatever comments I make wherever they like. Mm-hmm. Although she did agree to give me the entire transcript, because I did push her on that if I were to take part in it, then I would want the entire transcript of our conversation and the recording of our conversation. But in the end, I declined. She also made contact with, very recently, she sent a very similar kind of copy-paste email to Eva Bartlett, a very good colleague of mine and friend of mine,
right.
Who's also been covering the Syrian and previously the Palestinian issue. And she contacted Peter Ford, former UK ambassador to Syria. She contacted the working group on Syria media and propaganda that, of course, have been instrumental, really, from an academic perspective, writing about the false flags inside Syria, the chemical attacks and so on, and exposing the intelligence operations that have been trying to destabilize and overthrow the Syrian government. So, yeah, she contacted basically a fair number of those that have created, let's say, some of the biggest problems for the BBC and the British government in particular over the last sort of 5-6 years.
Right. I spoke very briefly via email with Ava because, as you mentioned, she's sent her also this copy-paste email, which I want to go through point by point with you. It's quite.
I mean, I have a history with the BBC. I mean, Mike Wendling, after the alleged Duma chemical attack, of course, he wrote the hit piece on me and Sarah Al-Adallah, who's a Twitter activist. Basically, you know, the usual conspiracy theorists were probably funded by Russia, by Syria, etc., etc. The same old kind of Stasi charge sheet, as I call it, you know, the neo-McCarthy charge sheet. You're anti-Semitic. I mean, you know, there's not much that they've omitted from the charge sheet, actually.
Yeah.
So basically, but this is, you know, they've come in with this right at the end. I mean, prior to that, Chloe was being very conciliatory, very kind of familiar. But what threw me was she started to talk to me about my father, about my time in Gaza. And I'm thinking, if I've only got 5 minutes in this entire program, why is it important to talk to me about my father, my background, my time in Gaza, and not my investigation into the White Helmets? Because to be honest, the investigation itself is so big, and there are so many elements to it that, you know, just to have 5 minutes to try and condense that down would be very difficult anyway. And this kind of diversion and distraction into these other issues seemed bizarre to me. The poor research on her behalf kind of also put me off, because I just felt, no, this isn't genuine. This is just another smear piece coming in, basically.
How long did you communicate with her before you were like, okay, I'm out, this is not it?
I think probably about a month, but I mean, not regularly. No, every now and then send other emails in and questions and so on.
So there's several points here in this this email, if we can call it that. It's a bit more than that. It's a rap sheet, essentially. From the get-go, about James Le Mesurier. I mean, this guy who essentially funneled all the money from the British government to the White Helmets and got them going. He's former British intelligence, and you know he winds up dead in Istanbul last year. What did you make of that when you heard that news?
Well, I mean, at the time, I remember speaking with Peter Ford about it, and his immediate response was, there's something fishy going on here, because the British Foreign Office were suspiciously quiet about his death. This is a guy that received the OBE from the Queen. It's a guy who had worked, as you said, within British military intelligence. You know, our best guess is he continued to be connected to MI6, and he worked in a number of British Foreign Office interventionist areas, so like Kosovo, Iraq, Yemen, Syria. The list is long, and he had a pretty prestigious career sheet in connection with British Foreign Office and intelligence operations in a number of countries, including, of course, in Kosovo, at the end of the NATO operations there to effectively balkanize former Yugoslavia. He was stationed in Pristina in '99 under the UN representative, who was Bernard Kouchner. And of course, this is where the history and context come into his involvement with the White Helmets, because in Kosovo, he was responsible for the transformation of the KLA, which were effectively Al-Qaeda and Albanian warlords, into the Kosovo Security Corps. So this was a sort of a whitewash of a terrorist and a mafia organization into something clean and cuddly for public consumption. But at the same time as he was doing this, the KLA were carrying out cross-border organ trafficking and human trafficking operations, which were extensively documented by Carla Del Ponte after '99. So obviously there's some mirroring here, because we do have the White Helmets, of course, that he brought into existence in 2013 when he was working for an organization called Analysis, Research and Knowledge, ARC Group,
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was in 2013 that he established the White Helmets in Turkey and Jordan. So not inside Syria, like the real Syria civil defense.
Exactly.
That were established inside Syria in 1953 and are the only recognized civil defense unit inside Syria by the International Civil Defense Organization in Geneva. That's a very important point for people to understand. The White Helmets are not recognized either by the Syrian people nor by the official body that covers civil defense organizations in Geneva. Basically, what Peter Ford said was that he believed that James Le Mesurier had probably been embezzling funds that were coming in from the British government to Mayday Rescue before being funneled to the White Helmets. Although it has to be said that the White Helmets and Mayday Rescue shared, I believe it was the same building, the offices in the same building in Istanbul. So they clearly worked in tandem. And of course, more recently, I think it was in the last month or so, it was the Dutch media and it was a Dutch accountant that had investigated the financial dealings of Mayday Rescue and found that I think 3 days before his death, James Le Mesurier, under investigation, had admitted fraud. He'd admitted the forging or the backdating of various invoices. He'd embezzled at least 50,000. I think he'd paid for his third wedding. His third wife actually worked with him at Mayday Rescue, Emma Winberg. And Emma Winberg was the co-founder of an organization called Inkestrat that was also funded by the British government to provide PR and media support for the armed groups, which included, and they were actually named in the contract with Inkestrat and the British government, included Jaish al-Islam, of course, who were the barbaric extremist group in charge of much of eastern Ghouta before they were moved out to Idlib.
Right. Speaking of all of these groups, you mentioned ARC. First of all, I'm guessing that you've read the article that the Grayzone wrote just about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, what did you make of that?
I mean, I think what was even more extraordinary, I mean, to some extent, what these documents did, and they were released by the same, I believe, the same anonymous group that released the information on Integrity Initiative. What these documents did in some way were vindicate what so many of us had been writing about and talking about for the last 4 or 5 years. For example, in 2016, I had found documents in the former Al-Qaeda Nusra Front centers in liberated East Aleppo. And of course, those Nusra Front centers were next door to the White Helmet centers, as they were in all the areas where the two groups operated side by side. Right. But I found documents there relating to Integrity Initiative and Adam Smith International. And the investigation that I did then, that of course everyone tried to ignore, led me back to the British government funding the local councils, which were headed up by Al-Qaeda, and of course the local White Helmet groups, which again were headed up in many cases by Al-Qaeda leaders or, you know, other extremist groups that worked alongside Al-Qaeda or operated in tandem with them. And what I really want to say about those documents, sorry, I forgot, is the fact that shortly after the documents were released, I think it was Dominic Raab who released a statement saying, yeah, but, you know, everybody knew about this anyway. So basically the documents were verified. Amazing. But it's all Russia's fault because Russia, this is cyber warfare by Russia. You know, they hacked our computers and stole the documents. And I was just reading this piece by Ian Cobain and Middle East Eye, just thinking, is that it? That's the best the government can do to try and cover up, you know, the biggest leak of information on their intelligence activities it's in amazing. Syria.
It's amazing. I mean, what did you make of this charge in the BBC email from Chloe Hadjimateo that you guys are essentially, that you and Eva are essentially in the pocket of the Assad government and the Russian government? That you're basically Kremlin agents or something. I mean.
I mean, I don't know. If I go back over the years, the 4 articles in the Times, the article in the Guardian, the endless articles from Chris York, trying to dismiss me as an obscure blogger, or again a Russian agent or a Syrian agent, etc., etc., etc. It's ridiculous. For one thing, the BBC is a state media outlet, right?
Exactly.
Just as RT is. So why does that mean that RT doesn't have the same rights to express itself, to produce information as the BBC has?
Yeah.
What is... I mean, we know what the big deal is, but it's ridiculous that RT is being demonized for doing the same job effectively, and doing it, I believe, in a much more objective, constructive way than the BBC is doing, for example.
The questions that they're asking you in this email, or not, the allegations rather, there's just straight up allegations. Most of them have nothing to do with the work that you did. I mean, as we just said, it's just character assassination. It's just smears. It's not actually asking you things about the White Helmet. It's just saying, oh, we looked into it and we don't like what you found. Now, what are your thoughts on you being a Russian agent? Like, it's insane.
You're right. I mean, and also they put in that I'm anti-Semitic. They put in some weird thing that that I had compassion for the Gaza orphans. This was just put in there like some kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm reading it here. It says that you were motivated by the suffering of children during your experiences in Gaza. Yeah, who the fuck wouldn't be motivated by that? I mean, how is that a bad thing? What are they trying to allege with that? I don't even understand what that means.
Yeah, and I'm an activist. It's I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether within the establishment they do think being an activist is a bad thing, or they think having compassion, actually, yes, maybe they do. They think having compassion for children is a really bad thing, or they think that being anti the Zionist entity and pro the Palestinian issue is a bad thing. So yeah, I guess in many ways Chloe and the BBC are reflecting not only BBC opinion, but those that behind the scenes control BBC opinion. And of course, that includes Mark Grayzone, the former ambassador to the UK from the Zionist entity, who's now gone back to advise Netanyahu on foreign media. So I think, it's a projection, again, very similar to what the Zionists do. Don't attack the message, attack the messenger.
Yes.
And that's very much what we're seeing, very much like the kind of Israel lobby tactics and strategy, which is to basically shoot the messenger, never address the issue or the message, because, you're not going to be able to counter the evidence.
More of these ridiculous points in the email. For example, there's one that says the Syrian government has provided you with visas and state escorts and suggested places you could visit. Yes, usually a government provides you with a visa when you enter the country. I mean, and it's a war, so obviously you're going to have an escort. And so I don't understand what that even means.
No, I mean, I don't understand what it means. And actually, if you spoke to Lise Doucette or to Jeremy Bowen, they would tell you that the Syrian government does exactly the same thing for them.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure what this point is supposed to mean. I mean, every journalist that enters Syria legally, of course, they're given the visa by the Syrian government. Right. And then, yes, of course, the Syrian government will suggest to them the safe areas or the liberated areas or the areas where, there have been recent events that are worth covering. And they will provide an escort, particularly if it's a high-risk area. And me, for one, I'm really happy that they do. When you're entering areas just after liberation, generally, the terrorist groups will leave behind booby traps and mines. There might be sleeping cells. There might be snipers still there, as there were actually when the OPCW inspectors first tried to go into Douma. They were fired on. So, for me, and actually I've made this point on one other interview, the hypocrisy of these media outfits, because when they do go into these areas and the Syrian army accompanies them, you will always see Syrian army soldiers putting themselves between wherever they think the risk might be and the journalist. Yeah. So in other words, they will put their body between the bullet and the journalist. right?
Yeah.
And these journalists will come and be protected and be escorted and be given access to wherever they want to go, pretty much, unless there's a risk or there's a security risk for them. And then they go away and write the stuff they do about the Syrian Arab Army.
Yeah,
it is unbelievable. And it's actually it's disgraceful, in my opinion.
Another point in this email, which I found hilarious, was that you see Britain as the corrupting force behind a lot of the horror in the world. Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with that.
Let's ask, I don't know, let's ask Kashmir, let's ask Pakistan, let's ask Palestine, let's ask just about any continent where Britain has gone in and carved it up and drawn lines over it or left some hideous, colonial legacy. Yeah, pretty much.
That was unbelievable. I really thought like this was a parody or something. So there was another one in here that said they're talking about your work on the white helmets and what you reported, and you've given testimony at the UN as well about this. They're trying to say here that we, meaning the BBC, found them not to have any substance.
But I would just like to point out that I recently asked Chloe Hadjamatiu if she had been to Syria at all during the conflict, and no, she hasn't. So basically, it's not me that's accusing the white helmets. Number one, much of the evidence against the white helmets is actually filmed or photographed by the white helmets themselves or by the armed groups. Or number two, the majority of the accusations against the white helmets are being levied by Syrian civilians that lived under the occupation of the armed groups and the white helmets. So by Chloe not even having deigned to get a visa and to enter Syria to speak to civilians, and it's not as if they're not available, to speak to civilians who would, reiterate the testimony that they've already given to Maxim Grigoriev of the Foundation for the Study of Democracy, and he's actually written a book based on the testimony that came in from civilians and former white helmets. And I love the fact also that she tries to say that I haven't spoken to either white helmets or to James Le Mesurier. Well, I have to say that James Le Mesurier blocked me immediately on Twitter and refused to respond to any requests for information that I sent, as did Raed Saleh, although I think it was Going Underground managed to kind of get him on at the same time as me, although they managed to not tell him that I was going to be on the same debate. And I interviewed operating white helmets in Dara during the Amnesty and Reconciliation negotiations. And I interviewed at the same time Adham Al-Krad, who was a leader of the engineering division of a group that was affiliated to Al-Qaeda in Dara, in that area. Actually, he's just been assassinated about 4 days ago in Dara, alongside 4 other leaders of what was, euphemistically called the Free Syrian Army. Of course, the Free Syrian Army rapidly became involved with both ISIS and Al-Qaeda after its creation. And I've also spoken to former white helmets, the white helmets that took Amnesty and Reconciliation when the majority of the white helmets, of course, left the liberated areas. They didn't stay behind as humanitarians would be expected to take care of the civilians. They left on the buses with the armed groups and set up camp again with the armed groups inside Idlib. So, not only are these questions really dull and really unimaginative and really repetitive from 4 years worth of smears and attacks, they don't address any of the evidence that is available. The producer of the program has not bothered to come to Syria. As far as I know, she's interviewed former school friends of James Le Mesurier and his family. Again, she let slip a name, Harry Wynne Williams. Harry Wynne Williams was working for Bell Pottinger from 2006 onwards, among other organizations. And of course, Bell Pottinger was given 500 million by the Pentagon to be embedded with the American military in Iraq to provide media backup for their neo-colonialist project there.
Yeah.
So, you know, as far as I can work out, she's spoken to white helmets and to lawyers and so on, but all of them kind of based around the UK Foreign Office operations. So, you know, I'm not really fully understanding. You know, she made a cursory effort to sort of get in touch, as I said, with myself, and with Paul McKeague. Paul McKeague of the working group has actually published his conversations with Chloe, and they're worth reading because he pushes her quite hard on information that she simply can't provide.
Right.
And that's the thing, when you pressure her, she kind of falls apart, you know. And I think that's indicative of the fact that the BBC right now is going into damage limitation of what is effectively a propaganda construct, the white helmets, and a very shady James Le Mesurier, who was clearly fraudulent in his financial dealings and clearly embezzling the funds that were coming in. And let's not forget, the Dutch government stopped funding the White Helmets in 2018 because there were no assurances from Mayday Rescue that the money wasn't being siphoned to Al-Qaeda in Idlib.
When it comes to damage control, as you said, with the BBC, do you think that's what they're trying to do with this program? Do you think that's the goal?
Yeah, I think so. I think so because, of course, you know, with the coming forward of, because there's two things. First of all, Riyam Dalati, who's a BBC producer, actually tweeted out that he had evidence that the Duma hospital scenes were staged. He then basically disappeared from Twitter. That's one thing. Why has the BBC not provided the information that Riyam Dalati clearly had to the OPCW and to the investigative teams?
Yeah.
Right, for the report. Why has that information been withheld? One. And secondly, of course, with the experts from within the OPCW, like Ian Henderson, who have come forward and exposed the OPCW as corrupted and their report as fraudulent, you know, an attempt to justify the UK, US and French unlawful aggression against Syria based on a dodgy dossier. Well, the BBC has a history of supporting dodgy dossiers,
Indeed.
Of course. You know, it supported it, the weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, the 45 minutes nonsense. Yeah.
In Iraq. They supported the Benghazi story in Libya, amongst others. You know, they have consistently underwritten effectively the UK intelligence operations and the UK Foreign Office intervention under humanitarian pretext yet again, as it is inside Syria. And the White Helmets are tasked, I mean, there is a 2017 British government document which states very clearly that the White Helmets are essential for both Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the British government to corroborate the evidence they need to basically, this is my wording, to criminalize the Syrian government. So, you know, with something as crucial as the White Helmets that has provided the evidence of all of the major chemical attacks inside Syria, even the Eastern Ghouta in 2013, although they were not so prominent then, they were there, and I have testimony from ambulance drivers and so on, appertaining to that event and appertaining to the role that the White Helmets played in that event also. So effectively, really, in my opinion, the White Helmets were brought in to ramp up the chemical weapon narrative in order to criminalize the Syrian government and Russia, of course.
And what did you make of the United Nations Security Council blocking the testimony of the OPCW former Director General Bustani?
I mean, just extraordinary. You know, I watched it live, and I can't agree more with Nebensia when Vasily Nebensia, the current president, of course, Russia's presiding over the Security Council this month, when he just said, to I think it was, I can't remember all the countries that voted against Bustani being able to speak when he was invited by the president of the UN Security Council. And he just said, you've just brought the UN Security Council into disgrace. This is the first time in history that this has happened, that a president has proposed a briefer and countries have actually pushed it to the vote to prevent that briefer speaking. So, extraordinary. And I mean, as I said to you, this is indicative of now, I think we're seeing a massive cover-up of, the operations that were being planned against Syria, of course, going back to 2003, the Bush-Blair communiques. Roland Dumas told us in 2013 that in 2009, British Foreign Office officials were talking to him about fomenting the revolution and funding groups, etc., etc. So I don't quite know how the BBC, how they can produce a program without even bringing in this kind of historical context. It's extraordinary, actually.
So one of the most concerning points in this entire email were the threats of legal action. So what went through your mind? What was your first reaction when you saw that?
I mean, it's not a direct threat. It's a sort of what I would call a veiled threat. But I guess my initial reaction was, okay, now they're going to real intimidation tactics. This is actual psychological warfare, really. Yeah. And then basically I spoke to Whitney Webb, who I've collaborated with a fair bit on quite a lot of the White Helmet research more recently, particularly actually into the British government involvement. And, she just said, this is outrageous. This is effectively on the back of, what they're doing to Julian Assange, the incarceration, the torture, the absolute kangaroo court, that is putting him on trial. And the fact that Assange, all he's really done is provide a safe platform for whistleblowers to come to and to drop information.
Including the OPCW leaks themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. WikiLeaks put those out as well alongside the Courage Foundation. So, I think what we're seeing here, I can't remember the name of the two bills because they're both escaping me right now, but there's one that is effectively the overseas bill.
Right,
yeah.
Overseas operations bill, and the other one is the spy cops or the CHIS bill.
Yeah. Exactly. So now basically MI5 and the British Army have carte blanche to commit crimes both abroad and at home.
It's unbelievable.
As part of their investigations. So I think we're entering also, combined with all the COVID-19 measures, etc., I think we're entering a period of lawlessness. And I think the fact that the BBC, they're a media outlet, they're treading or they're skating on very thin ice if they start to issue semi-legal threats to another journalist. We're heading in a police state, basically. And I think there's also a case, with Craig Murray, who's, I believe, is being held in contempt of court at the Julian Assange case. The Scottish Justice Minister, or whatever he is, has basically said that if Craig Murray tweets something out, he's responsible for the responses to his tweet. So if somebody, in their opinion, replies with hate speech or whatever, Craig Murray is responsible for it. Now, someone made a really good point to me the other day. He said, well, in that case, isn't Twitter responsible for all of it? Because if we're talking about the publisher or the creator of something, Twitter is the platform on which everyone is publishing. So aren't Twitter responsible for everything that's published on there? And I said, combine that with the lawlessness, the fact that British military and British intelligence now have the right to commit crimes in service of their investigations. I don't know. I just think we're entering into really scary times, actually.
Yeah. What would you like everyone to know? Because obviously the BBC wouldn't have given you a fair chance to say anything about that. And you've done years of research on this and documented everything. So, I mean, what would you have liked to get across if you had been given a fair chance on the program?
As I've already said, the White Helmets are not recognized by the International Civil Defense Organization as the official civil defense organization inside Syria. They are providing surveillance through the US State Department-backed HALA systems, and that surveillance is being provided to the armed groups dominated by Al-Qaeda in Idlib, detailing the incoming flights of Syrian and Russian aircraft. So they're providing a surveillance work for Al-Qaeda. They've been embedded exclusively with Al-Qaeda and associated extremist groups. They've attended and they've cleaned up after executions of civilians and prisoners of war. They've publicly called for the extermination of ethnic minorities, like in Kafra and Fua in Idlib. You know, the list is endless. Yeah, the list is actually endless.
You know, I'm reading this email that they sent you, and this Chloe Hadjimateo, who she herself has not been to Syria, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and you know, she's levying accusations of you and Eva not being journalists and conducting yourselves with the proper rigor of a journalist. I mean, look who's talking. Look at the email that she sent.
Because actually, you know, as much as I loathe what the BBC and what the mainstream media have done to Syria, to Iraq, to Libya, etc., etc., there is a sort of ethical politeness that I would always employ if I'm talking to them. Of course, if I were to go to a live debate, then no, it would become more passionate. Yeah. But I think this whole thing that, to be honest, even if I were being funded by Russia or by Syria, and I'm not, but if I were, that doesn't detract from the evidence that I've put out there.
Right.
So, you know, this is dishonest reporting by Chloe, or whoever is instructing her to send this email with these accusations. Because as I said, and as you've said, and all of us have said over the years, you're not engaging with the facts. Yeah. And it's like Chris York never went to Syria. Never even tried to get a visa, as far as I know. But still, he would push on tiny details on information we're producing from on the ground. And that's what Chloe is doing. She's putting out these blanket accusations, charge sheets. But she's not engaging. And even if she had done the so-called interview with me, you know, Peter Ford told me she was appalling. He put the phone down on her. You know, so I don't think we would have got much further, because, you know, the thing is with these journalists, they have a script and they have a destination of where they have to get to, and clearly Chloe's destination is to end up discrediting us and whitewashing the White Helmets and James and Missouri. That's her remit. So she's doing her job.
So typical of the BBC, honestly. I mean, I was disgusted by it, but I wasn't like fundamentally shocked. I was like, yeah, this is the BBC. Yeah, they would do this. Yeah. So Vanessa, just before I let you go, where can people find more of your work? Where can they learn more about what you did and what you covered in Syria?
They can go to my Patreon account. I write obviously for RT as a freelancer. They can unlimited hangout, Mint Press News, Last American Vagabond. Oh, and UK column news in the UK.
Okay. And your Twitter handle?
At Vanessa Beeley. Easy. Perfect.
Vanessa, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your reporting and for coming on and talking about this scandalous BBC email. I really appreciate it.
Bless you. No, thank you for everything you do as well. I love it when you get really pissed off about something in Syria. It's just great when you can swear in 3 languages. It's impressive.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much,
All
Vanessa.
right. Thanks a lot, Richard.